I'm not comfortable with that at all, and people are not going to like this. Seeing a shrinking of the middle class and expansion of the upper class and lower class. The credit card defaults increased after 2008, and this, I'm really like tiptoeing around a lot of things here. And it's like, for the average person, a 401k is, and it's basically looking like 2008 all over again. The New York Stock Exchange does that during sell-offs, and the AI might become self-correcting. Alright, hello everybody, thank you for joining me this evening. I'm Nathan, the owner of Atlantic Financial Management, the investment advisory firm out of Ben Salem. I'm going to get into it with a quick disclosure before we get started. The content in this video is for general and informational and educational purposes only. It's not personalized financial, tax, or investment advice, and it shouldn't be taken as a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific investment. I'm a registered investment advisor and owner of Atlantic Financial Management in Ben Salem, Pennsylvania. If anything you hear today resonates with you or your situation, the next step is a one-on-one conversation. For our full disclosures, visit atlanticfinancialmanagement.com. Okay, with that, we are going to get right into it. Well, maybe I should give a few announcements first, because it is important. I am running a business at the end of the day. So a few things. I've got some things in the works. It's going to be some pretty big announcements coming here soon. I don't want to spoil any of it. If you know me, you know I like surprises. I surprised my fiance with our proposal. She had no idea until I was on one knee. So, you know what I mean? I'm trying to do something similar for you guys. It's killing me not to say it. Some people do know what's in store, but for the broader masses, yeah, there's going to be some pretty cool stuff coming down the pipeline. So stay tuned for that. If you know anybody who is looking for any type of financial advice or anything of that nature, please reference me, refer me to them, get us connected. That helps a lot. Or even just sharing this video or some of the other content that I have on my Instagram, giving my YouTube a follow or a subscribe and a like and all that. Same thing with Facebook. Obviously, I'm trying to get out there more, so it's your support that really helps me a lot. And yeah, so I don't think I have anything else to offer other than we have some interesting stuff coming up, and I definitely appreciate some help. And actually, there is one more thing, but I'll save that. But yeah, so there's actually a few things, stuff that I even forgot about. But with that said, we're going to get right into it. So one of the top stories, and then this has been a theme for a little while, is 529 plans have been an interesting focus. So if you know me, you know that 529 plans is a very common strategy that I employ with couples, especially in Pennsylvania. And again, I'm just going to preface this with a quick, everything I say is going to have a quick disclosure. It has to. And you'll see why. You'll see why, because there's actually a story that occurred this week that's very important to go over, and you'll see why I'm so paranoid about some of this stuff. But, this does not apply to everybody, but, for clients that I do sit down and see that it applies to, 529 accounts in the state of Pennsylvania offer a state income tax deduction. So you're able, if you fund a 529, you're able to take that to your accountant, and he's able to mark down some income off of your state income taxes. Always consult a tax professional before employing any of these strategies. But what's also special about Pennsylvania is they honor the Virginia 529 plan. And for those of you who are unaware of what the Virginia 529 is, you can utilize, so most 529 plans are done state specific. So I shouldn't say most, but there's a lot of cases where the 529 only applies to that state. So if you fund, and this I don't know for certain, but I'm from Rhode Island, so I'm just going to use them. If you fund a Rhode Island 529 plan, actually I think specifically Rhode Island's 529 allows you to go to Connecticut and Massachusetts also. So I need to double check that, but I believe that that's true. That if you fund a 529 plan, you're eligible to enroll or utilize the funds for, Rhode Island universities and colleges and higher education. Well, all education actually, but you're able to use it for colleges and universities in Connecticut and Massachusetts as well. Anyways, Virginia allows you to go to any college in the country, as far as I'm aware right now. So you can go to any college and utilize those 529 accounts, and that's great. But not every state honors the income tax deduction for that. However, if you're a Pennsylvania resident, Pennsylvania does honor that. So you can utilize a 529 account in a Virginia 529 account in Pennsylvania, and they'll still honor the state income tax deduction. So that's very important to know. What's also important to know is some of the progress that's been made in these 529 accounts. So my speculation, and I bet I could probably look into this more and find some real substantial facts for it, but colleges have become increasingly expensive, not inexpensive, they've become more expensive. 529, people are dropping out of college at, fairly high rates, and people are getting generally constricted by the 529 accounts, and they oftentimes don't think that a 529 is a good strategy for them, because what if their kid doesn't go to college? These funds are going to be locked up. There's going to be certain penalties, or you're going to get hit with just unnecessary cost to capital if you invest in a 529 and your child doesn't go to college, right? Or higher education for that matter. That said, I believe it was the Secure Act 2.0 put in some stipulations on how you can utilize a 529 and convert it into a Roth IRA. Now, currently, I believe the maximum limit, lifetime limit to that is $35,000 total, and you can only convert right now $7,500 a year, but you can only convert up to the yearly limit for your IRA accounts, specifically the Roth IRA. So, what that means, the good news is the cost basis increases, right? So, it's not like you're going to be paying taxes on it anyways, but it's not like that conversion. So when you convert from when you convert from a traditional IRA to a Roth IRA, you'll have to pay some taxes on that conversion, and it'll be counted towards your income at the end of the year. However, when you convert from a 529 to a Roth IRA, you actually get a step up in cost basis, which means that you're not going to pay taxes on that conversion, which is extremely important. Now, there is a bottleneck at $35,000 total lifetime limit. Now, and this is speculation, this isn't fact, but I would expect with the progressive push in modifying the 529 account and its capabilities and conversions, we're likely going to see that lifetime limit increase, just like we're seeing the yearly limit increase on IRA, traditional IRA and Roth IRA contributions, right? So, just be aware of that. I wouldn't say to bank on it or plan on it, because anything can happen, but it's just something to note that, that is absolutely a possibility that this lifetime limit can increase. And so in the Secure Act 2.0, they introduced this conversion method so that, people like me, when I'm sitting down with clients, I can say, look, a 529 is a feasible option. I don't want to use the word waste, but it's, after the Secure Act 2.0, it's not going to be as restrictive as you would originally think. And that's important because, every little thing counts. If we can get some money taken off of your state income taxes, then that's great. That's exactly what we want, right? So, it's something to think about. It's something to utilize. It's in a lot of my plans. And the good news is one of the more recent developments is there's a push right now in our government to not only permit these same rollovers into conversions into the Roth IRA, but they're going to allow some of these funds to be utilized for home buying and home purchases. And you've always had that ability in IRA accounts. I believe the last limit I know was $10,000, and that may or may not be a current and accurate figure. But you could always use, or not always, but at least within the last 3 years, I know for a fact you could use $10,000 from traditional or a Roth IRA. It wouldn't be counted as an early distribution. You could take that money out and use it for the first purchase of a primary home. So it has to be the first purchase. It would have to be a primary home, but you could utilize that money. And where we sit right now, where we sit right now, this really isn't like a big takeaway. Like it's good to see that there's going to be some flexibility and that we're opening up, a new frontier and having a flexible account that gives us certain tax advantages, because for the longest time we really only had the traditional IRA and the Roth IRA, and it was like you can't access this money until you're 59 and a half, and then you have your UTMA and UGMA, which had very specific stipulations for the beneficiary. But now the 529 is becoming versatile because we can put the 529 in for a child, and its primary purpose and its principal purpose in the beginning is for college. Then we said, all right, well, what happens if they have too much money in that account? Now we can convert that money into a Roth IRA, which is great. Now that gives us versatility. And now we're talking about putting it into home buying and giving us a new advantage there. And really what this is turning into a great multi-tool to set your child, and there's varying degrees of success, and success isn't always guaranteed, but this is becoming a multi-tool that could lead to a great launching platform for children in early adulthood. So, always speak with a financial professional first. I have my own strategies for 529 accounts. Other financial professionals have theirs, and this is a running theme, but everybody should know when you're working with somebody, just because they do something different doesn't mean it's wrong. But I do believe a 529 is almost a staple to have, especially if you have children. But even if you don't, if you have nephews and nieces, it's a good way you can open up a 529 for them, and you can contribute to that. It's really a great tool for the older generation to give back to the younger generation. Great is subjective, so don't quote me. I find it to be a great tool. So, next, home insurance. Now, this is a difficult topic to go over because we really don't know the degree at which. Well, I'll read the headline and we'll go over it. So, right now, Wall Street Journal found that the 5 largest insurers show 44% non-payment rate in 2025, up from 36% a decade ago. I'm not going to get into the actual specific companies just because I don't want to open myself up to any risks, but any unnecessary risks. But there's some numbers that are at over 50%, and even over 60%, which is great. It's crazy to think on the surface that over half of claims are being denied. But here's the thing. Here's the question, and similar to last week, how I was saying credit card defaults are increasing, and is that because people are working 3 jobs and they can't afford to pay their bills, or is it because they're giving up? Both are. We know it's happening, but we don't know why specifically, and that is something that you need to think about and take into account, because it means 2 very different things. Like Japan and South Korea, both very hardworking cultures. If we saw very, very hardworking cultures, if we saw credit rates, decline, we'd be like, all right, these people are working. They have a culture of working 12-hour days every single day. There's got to be something going on with wages. In America, it's really up in the air, because I know a lot of hardworking people, and I would preface, this is a hardworking country. There's a lot of people. I actually get pretty offended when people say that there's not a lot of hard workers. I know I personally work very, very hard. And I would assume that these numbers are coming from hardworking people, but we need to understand that there is a welfare portion of this country, and there are people who take advantage of that system, and it needs to be accounted for. So we don't know the specifics of this, and that same mentality has to go into this case also, where we see on average 44% of these claims aren't being resolved, and they're being declined. And basically, declined versus money paid out is being kind of counted as the same thing here, but there is a difference, being declined versus not being paid, some of these claims may just be faulty claims. And that kind of goes in, it would correlate with, seeing that America's credit rate, America's discretionary credit defaults are increasing, right? So we're seeing these defaults increasing. People might be getting desperate and trying to put claims on their home to get payouts, right? So, and then the insurance company might be sitting there. This rise may be from the consumer base, not because the insurance companies are cutting costs. That's the point I'm trying to get out there to people is, look, we're at 44%. It's increased 8% over a decade, and we're seeing some insurers are over 50% denial rates. But at the same time, we see credit defaults increasing. And what's another way of getting a quick, fast, and easy primary lump sum payout? People could be opting to make claims on their homes. And that's not to run cover for the insurance companies, because the insurance companies have also not been completely transparent. So, it's just something to think about. It's food for thought. We really don't have a clear answer. But, moving forward from that, and very closely related to that, is even the private credit industry, and this is going to be our third story, private credit, there's a crackdown from regulators. They're saying that, certain institutions are not being completely transparent with their real estate holdings specifically, which is scary. And it's basically looking like 2008 all over again. For those of you who are aware, a great movie to watch is The Big Short. Great cast, star-studded cast. In it, you have a scene where they're going over the bond ratings for the mortgage-backed securities. And I believe it was Steve Carell's character was sitting down with the lady who was getting these ratings together. And he's going to her, he's like, what you're doing is illegal? I forget if it's him or not. But one of the characters basically sits down with her and says, what you're doing is illegal? Like, you're basically selling subprime mortgages as AAA rated bonds, which means that it's the number one, like you're almost next to guaranteed to getting your money back. Fun fact, the United States is the only bond that is guaranteed by the full faith and credit of the United States. So that's the only bond you can say is guaranteed, or only investment product, or you know what I mean. So anyways, I'm not going to get into the nuanced details of that, but that is a fun fact. But yeah, they're basically saying, this time it's not coming from, a separate institution. It's coming from the banks themselves. They're basically crediting, saying, hey, look, yeah, these mortgages, these properties are at, this price, this rating. And it's just looking like a repeat of 2008. So very, very scary. What's interesting was the credit rates, or the credit card defaults, increased after 2008. Obviously, we can kind of understand why that is, right? After 2008, people lost everything. So naturally, you're going to see more people taking out credit because they're desperate. Now we're seeing something very similar, but very, very different. We're seeing delinquencies rise before any type of market crash. So delinquencies are rising in conjunction with property claims rising, in conjunction with certain legal actions going after certain banks saying, hey, look, your prices aren't accurate, or we don't believe your prices are accurate to what or the value of what you're saying, right? And on top of that, a very important note is, I just had it and I lost it, but it is a very big important note. It's going to kill me. I had it and I lost it. But yeah, I mean, that is important. We're seeing all three of these things moving at the same time, but people are desperate, moving into what could be a 2008 scenario. So, it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. there's a lot of advisors, myself included, who understand that, the market is not as firm as we'd like it to be. And then this is one of those exploits. And even when they set up fiat currency, they literally said the market's going to go in boom and bust cycles. And that's one thing that investors should be aware of. Like, every investor should be aware that it's a boom and bust cycle. It was designed that way. Any market analyst who knows anything about fiat currency markets knows that it has a natural ebb and flow. Every market generally does, but more so fiat currencies, the one that we're in, has an ebb and a flow. Again, not to get too much into my strategies and the information that I license, but I absolutely take this into account, and I know a lot of other great advisors who take this into account. And sometimes when I look at a buy and hold strategy, and this is not actionable, do not take action on this. Absolutely speak with an advisor. Because again, this is the reason why I'm in this, is because if you're watching this, you're probably not like me. There's probably very few licensed advisors who are actually watching this right now and even made it this far, because I'm just saying a bunch of stuff they already know. The oil thing might be a little bit more interesting, but you need to understand this right now. I am licensed. I do this for a living. The great colleagues that I have, who I know do a good job, they're licensed. They do this for a living. We watch the market all day long, with certain exceptions, but we stay very, very informed with the market. The reason I do this specifically is because I am not comfortable that citizens of this country are forced into a gambling process with their life savings every single day. Their entire life until retirement, from when they start working to when they retire, their entire life savings is on the line. And just because they were born at different times could mean the difference between somebody retiring and somebody working for the rest of their life. I'm not comfortable with that at all, and that's my primary motivation for doing what I do today, is specifically that, so that I can help people navigate the markets. And I would like to think that my services give them a fighting chance of making their life what they want it to be. So please, got a little bit animated there, but that's exactly the point. That's why I do what I do. That's why I license research, and I believe that my research has had a really good track, or the research that I license, the people that I work with, have had a really good track history, and past performance doesn't guarantee future returns. So I do need to throw that out there. We could be wrong. Anything can happen. And that's another thing, you as a client or listener should be aware of. Anything can happen. There's no one perfect strategy. Even the strategy that we use could fail, and we'd have to hit the drawing board again. And that's like an uncomfortable thing. It could. I would hope that we've done enough research, and there's a lot of supporting data that it can be effective in the future. And I'm really tiptoeing around a lot of things here, but it's important for you as a client to know there's going to be boom and bust cycles. That's written into the market and the way it works. And there's strategies that attempt to take advantage of that, and kind of defend against big drawdowns, and then kind of maximize the booms, right? So and that's what everybody's looking for. And some advisors have been able to achieve that in the past, and I will say there's advisors who have been able to achieve that in the past, and then that strategy becomes obsolete, and that is a fact. So that's probably the best way I can put that out. But yeah, so, we're just looking at another kind of 2008 situation where the credibility of, oh, that's right. And here's the other thing of so we have higher delinquencies and credit rate. We have increased insurance claims. Basically, people are saying think about it, people are probably saying, this home sucks. I want to get out from under this home. Rather than sell it, which I probably can't do because nobody's buying, I'm gonna make a claim and have the insurance company buy me out of this house, right? So that could be a very legitimate strategy. You see that even the banking institutions are saying, yeah, look, the home is worth X, and people like the regulatory agencies are saying, actually it's not. We don't believe you. This doesn't add up. And then on top of that, you have the same institutions are having people pulling out and redeeming their shares at a much higher rate than they should be. And they've actually had to, some of them had to stop and halt and say, hey, we can't have anybody redeeming any more shares for the time being. You know when they do that? Well, I shouldn't say every, but the market does that. The New York Stock Exchange does that during sell-offs. And they're only allowed to do that 3 times a day. And at the third time, they shut it off completely and nobody can trade. And you're basically seeing a small version of that inside the market currently. So, it's interesting. We'll see what happens. In other news, well, I don't know which one I want to hit first. I mean, this one's a real quick one. Bitcoin's lost millions of dollars just in this week. So, you're seeing outflows in Bitcoin. Yeah, and then inflation. So, the PCE is very similar to inflation data. It basically covers consumer expenses. And that's great. I tell a lot of my clients, look, if you want to know the real effects of inflation, you need to look at the price of milk, the price of eggs, small commodities, because the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that covers a very broad range of things. And from high expense items, and these high expense items, a lot of stuff has dropped in price. Ironically, it's the everyday consumables that have appreciated. Not maybe appreciate, it's not a good word, but the cost has increased to the consumer. And so a really good way of measuring that is actually through PCE. And they've seen that PCE is coming at 3.3% per year. And I guess the Fed's target's at 2.3. So, we're getting closer to where we want to be. Obviously, I don't like any inflation. Some stuff, and there's some things where it is what it is. It's not the way you want it to be, but we're in a world right now where, you have to make do with what you've got, the hand you're dealt. So, as long as we have this system, this is going to be something that we have to deal with. And I don't think we'll ever live in a perfect world, at least not in our lifetimes. So, sometimes you need to drop the idealism and work with reality. All right. Early retirement, more than 40% are retiring earlier than planned. About half of them were because they saved enough. The other half were because of cited health issues or job loss. And that's another really important point to look at. So 40% are retiring early. And so of the original data, we're stacking on another 40%. 40% growth in this area. A little over half of them are because they made good money. And we know this to be true. We know the stock market has boomed. It's done amazing. It's been like one of the, best is objective word or a subjective word, but it's been a place where people who have put money into the market have made good money back. And so they're able to retire early. Yet 19% are dropping out because they're citing major health issues or job loss. And now I don't know, maybe I could have looked up what those numbers are, but job loss, absolutely. There's been a lot of layoffs, and then health issues. So I'd like to think I'm a very healthy person. I take my health very serious, but what can we speculate when people say health issues? Similar to insurance claims, these health issues may be false claims. And who's not going to give these claims ever since what happened with that kid with the healthcare CEO, Luigi, I forget. I think that's his last name, Luigi. But, so like there's an environment where they might be a little more lenient in giving, handing out claims, you know what I mean? So we're looking at a thing or a situation where, I'm sure there's some legitimacy to these. But you also have some speculation like, hey, look, these might be people who would have otherwise worked through whatever pain they had because they were making good money. They're opting out. They're saying, I'd rather just get a check from my health insurance, file a claim, and then move forward. Job loss, absolutely. If you have a decent enough retirement and you don't want to look for another job, maybe you retire 5 or 6 years early. So, very interesting, the other side of that, because they're saying 21 here in the article as the majority is because they've made good money. But looking at the 1% off minority is something very interesting to speculate, because that is what we're seeing. We're seeing a shrinking of the middle class, an expansion of the upper class and lower class. And the other half is not saying they're retiring because they have more money. They're almost saying the opposite, or neutral. Job loss, they had enough money to retire. So we'll see. Another interesting thing, I know I kind of laughed about Jerome Powell last week, but Trump, one of his big advisors, is pushing for Fed independence. We'll see what that looks like, but Trump's also made the statement, like I spoke about, that he's looking to be independent, let Kevin do his thing. And then you see that another, I guess his name's Paul Winfrey. I don't know too much about him, but he was a former administrative official who helped him out. And Daniel Heil. I don't think I'm pronouncing his name right, but seem like two educated people. We'll see. That's a wait and see. So. All right, we got 2 more stories, and then we're going to take a quick break and go into the Middle East. And I think I'm going to start with AI. So I actually had a quick little video about Anthropic this week. Again, I should say and reiterate, it's an interesting phenomenon, but again, by no means is that a call to purchase, sell, or hold Anthropic. But we're seeing Anthropic the other day. So if you didn't watch the video, just to catch you up, Anthropic confidentially filed a, they want to go public, confidentially filed IPO paperwork. And this coffee is absolutely cold, I'm positive of that. But whatever. So they confidentially filed IPO paperwork. It's very interesting because the same day they filed that, Sam Altman and OpenAI got brought into court in Florida for harms against children. And I do believe at these high levels, there's very strategic ways of doing things. I don't think that that's a coincidence at all. And I believe OpenAI is also looking to file IPO paperwork. I don't know the timeline or anything about that. I just, focus kind of on Anthropic. And, recently they came out, I believe it was yesterday or this morning, saying, look, we need to halt AI development. And I heard some of the commentaries, somebody was saying, well, are they doing this so that they can put pressure on their competition, have them pause while they move forward? They're saying the AI might become self-correcting, and if that's the case, they may not have, it's kind of like a chain reaction. Once the AI becomes self-correcting, who knows where it's going to go? And that's very interesting to think. Maybe what I'll be doing to follow this up is kind of looking into where other countries are, seeing if we're at a point where, we could take a strategic pause. And because that sometimes you have to do that. But throughout history, it's always been the innovators are pushing up against the line of safety. And it's just so hard to control that. It's just a natural phenomenon. I was literally driving in the car thinking about it. It's like in the very early world, people were carving spears before anybody could say, hey, let's try and set up some laws about if somebody stabs somebody else with a spear, what's going to happen, right? And it's always, new technology kind of has the theme of causing turmoil because it's new, it's novel. People don't know what to do about it, and you're not going to know until the after effects how to deal with it. So, like, honestly, I'm getting to the point where it's not like, I wouldn't call it nihilism, but it's just like things are going to happen the way they happen. Like this AI conversation, there's no stopping it. So let's not even have that conversation about slowing it down, because it's not going to slow down. Even if it slows down in America, it's not going to slow down in any other country, because I believe that we are leading the pack. So, like, I haven't really completely thought out, but I do know that I'm at a point where it's like, all right, as a society, we need to understand new technology is going to come out. It's always going to be a point of contention. There's always going to be people who prefer the old way to the new, and vice versa. And the middle ground is going to be running to catch up to the people who are sprinting towards whatever new thing it is. So, I mean, the point of them saying this is interesting. I would love to believe it's altruistic. I really hope it is. I really, really hope it is. So, but again, there's no controlling it. There's nothing, you know what I mean? Like, there is some protests, but what are we really going to do about it? I believe in adapting, and I honestly believe, from what I've seen in my life and what I've seen from other successful people, you pivot. You need to adapt, because the people who can't adapt to new market situations or new situations in life in general, if you can't adapt, you're just going to get overcome. So, it is what it is. At this level, at our level, if you're listening to this, you're probably somebody who, owns, if you're not in the real estate space, maybe you own 1 to 3 homes. If you are in the real estate space, you probably aren't doing investments. I have found that a lot of, I call them my counterparts, real estate people, do almost solely real estate, and it seems like everybody else really just kind of does solely investments. And I wouldn't say never shall the two meet, but you'll see real estate people do like 10% in any type of like security or 401k, or not 401k, generally they don't have those, but like a SEP IRA or something like that. They'll have like 10% of their net worth in that. And then it's like the opposite. You'll have people who, or maybe not quite the opposite, but they'll own 1 or 3 homes, and then the rest of their money's in investments, securities and things like that. Forget where I was going with that, but yeah, that's right. So if you're one of those people, if you're not one of these people that has $1 billion company or a $1 million company, if you're not one of them, look, just try and pivot, do the best you can. Have, your 3 financial doctors, an accountant, an advisor, and a lawyer. If you have those 3 and you have a good head on your shoulders, it's crazy. The compliance is crazy. I mean, even me saying something like "you should be okay" opens up ramifications. So, but I'll say this: you have an opportunity of being all right. But going along with that, IBM also announced, this is not a call to buy, sell, or hold. This is just an interesting thing to think about for the future. IBM's putting $10 billion into quantum computing, which is very, very interesting. And manufacturing, R&D, manufacturing, and the Andron chip foundry, and 90 plus deployed quantum systems. So it is a very, very interesting rollout. I think that's interesting, and I think it's cool. But Arizona, which has been kind of one of the guinea pigs for the data centers, and people are not going to like this. Again, especially if you're, listening to this, you're probably one of the people like me, right? They have had a rate hike of 45% for data center extra large users, alongside a 14.5% residential customer increase in their electricity bill, it seems. So, the note I have here actually isn't necessarily the clearest, but, people are kind of upset about that. I guess from the data center usages, their energy bills are going up. So, we'll see what happens with that. I wish I kind of had a little more verification on that one before I got started today, but that's all right. Maybe I'll go back and post something. But here's my last story and big story so that everybody can see kind of what I'm dealing with. Short seller Andrew Left got convicted and shakes the industry. Basically, this guy, Andrew Left, I looked into him a little bit. He's not a licensed professional. He seems to be some type of, trading personality. He's very public about the trades that he makes. And, he got hit. And look, I have a note here talking about like some of the downstream implications. Look, if I've got to police what I say, because, you know what I mean, I could get damages because somebody makes an investment based off of what I say. If I am subject to that, just because I have licenses, I don't think other people should have free reign to say what they say. And I've seen people, like these internet personality advisors, making bold claims, and it bothers me a lot because I know that there's people who are out there taking that advice, and again, like, you need to be a very specific person. Like, you can't be making these blanket claims. Like, I've seen some people saying things like, why would you contribute to 401ks? And it's like, for the average person, a 401k is like, and again, it's so tough to talk about, but a 401k is completely applicable to a lot of people. Let's put it that way. It's completely applicable, and to call it dumb is going to hurt people who might not be educated on their situation and aren't otherwise going to go and talk to a financial professional. That's like my big problem. So it just, like, is it applicable for some people? Yeah, from my experience, there's going to be a very specific person. I was having a conversation with a buddy about this. If you're like a 20-year-old kid, 25-year-old kid, and you're getting ready to start a business, and you say, here's my 5-year plan. In 2 or 3 years, I plan on starting this business. Like, there's a case that could be made that, yeah, that money that you're putting in the 401k might be better used at startup costs. And that's not even everybody. I mean, if the kid's making really good money, he got a good spot, maybe he can afford to contribute to the 401k. Nobody knows, because you should always consult somebody before you make these big strategic decisions. And that's kind of my point, is you have all these people on the internet who are making all these claims for clickbait and whatever. And, you got a guy here, finally somebody gets hit. Now, I don't know about his work, and I will say I hate the thought, for most people going to prison. I don't like the idea of, I don't know if he's going to go to prison or not. But I just don't like the idea. Like, I really don't get any pleasure out of people's lives or livelihoods being stripped of them, especially their freedom. It's, and I understand that there's cases for it. We live in a society where, everybody knows the rules. And maybe I should look into this more. Maybe there's been a lot of people who, have made claims and probably had like worse outcomes. But I guess from my understanding, what he was doing was he was kind of doing what's called a pump and dump, or front running. And he would sit there and say, oh yeah, this stock's going to short. And then behind the scenes, he was doing trades that, he's got this big following of people. And I've heard of other people doing this too. So be careful who you listen to on the internet. But basically what he was doing is he's saying, oh yeah, this is going to go down for sure. The stock's going to go down for sure. And, everybody would sit there and short the stock. Meanwhile, he's on the other side of the trade making a ton of money. So, and all these other people are losing out, because he's just sitting there on the opposite side of the trade now, and he knows what's going to happen, or has a very good understanding of what's going to happen. So, yeah, so, very interesting. But anyways, with all that said, that's going to kind of wrap up the first part of this. I'm going to take a quick break, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to go into the Middle East, because this will be the biggest breakdown that I think anybody has seen. And I think that I'm going to have to do even more on it, because there's significant things that in my research I've found that people aren't talking about. And to also preface this, I've seen a lot of people who, you know, they have opinions on this situation that, although maybe portions of the opinions aren't unwarranted, it's such a broader issue. And when you really kind of go into the details of it, you realize, like, yeah, this is more than just one country pulling us into a war. I think that this is a broader strategic move that's spanned multiple presidencies and administrations. And, you know, we'll get into all of that here in a little bit. But for now, maybe I'll put like some waiting music on, and I'll see you in a sec. All right, everyone, we're back for the second part. So I had some technical difficulties. What I wanted to do was kind of do a screen recording, and I probably will do some screen recordings. But what I'm really just going to do for us is make kind of a slideshow, because the logistical problems of making a screen recording that long was just insurmountable for me right now. So I'll figure it out. But what you probably see right now is a picture of the strait. So to break all this down, all the circles are military bases. All the pentagons are major infrastructure in the area. All very important. I just want to check. All right, so good. So what you see is the shipping lanes. Now you can see that there's various X's on the screen, and we'll get into all of that in a moment. But what you really need to know about is, you know, the status. And to summarize what everybody already knows, you can see at that bottom right is the Strait of Hormuz. That's blocked off by Iran, and the green lines that are going up through the Persian Gulf, that is pretty much all the shipping lanes. And this whole recent conflict sparked because Iran's claiming that we struck a ship that was on its way to Karg Island, and you can see that blue X up in the towards the middle of your screen, headed towards that red Pentagon. I'm going to show it in a little bit more detail right here. This is allegedly where the U.S. strike took place. So in response to that, there were some other subsequent attacks. But really, you know, this is a show more so about the economics of the world. And, you know, rather than going into all these specific events, we're going to go into what the real gravity of the situation is. So, before the war, as the world stood, the world consumes roughly 106 million barrels per day of oil. And of that, roughly 20%, specifically 19.1%, comes from this area. All right, so 19.1% of the world's oil, almost 1/5, comes out of this area alone. I'm going to take another screenshot here. Right. So 1/5 comes from there. Almost 1/10 of the world's oil, 8.5%, comes out of Saudi Arabia. A quarter of their oil is exported to China, 20% to India, 15% goes to Japan. All right. Following them is Iraq. Iraq actually produces 4.2% of the world's oil. Again, they primarily export to China. Then at 35% of their oil, 25% goes to India, and then roughly 10% goes to South Korea. Following them, actually not following them, they produce a little bit more, is Iran at 4.6 million barrels per day. And they supply roughly 4.3% of the world's oil. And their far and wide primary importer of Iranian oil is China at 91%. Then we have Qatar. They produce 1.8% of the world's oil at 1.9 million barrels per day. They primarily export to our ally Japan, South Korea, India, and then China. Following China is actually Singapore and Taiwan. But roughly 1/3 of their oil goes specifically to Japan, and then 20% goes to South Korea. So another thing that's important to note is liquid natural gas, right? So we have our oil, but we also have liquid natural gas. And when we look at it, the United States is the number one producer of both oil and gas. And then Australia, I did not know this. Australia is actually the third largest producer, um, or second largest producer of liquid natural gas. They're neck and neck with Qatar. And Qatari liquid natural gas is very important. And what we've seen actually from some strikes is that Qatar, part of Qatar's infrastructure, and you can see, I'm sure you see it, Qatar's a relatively small area in the Middle East, but they produce roughly 20% of the world's liquid natural gas. And their major infrastructure that helps to process this was struck recently, and it's downgraded their capacity by about 20% for the foreseeable next 5 years. So I'm just checking something. All right, good. So they've been struck. That struck. Excuse me. That strike was pertinent. It set them back possibly 5 years, right? So that's all very important to know. And then Russia and Malaysia are actually other big players in the liquid natural gas space. So that's kind of the situation that we're at. So that's the infrastructure. 20% of the world's energy from oil and natural gas comes out of the Arabian Sea, right? The Persian Gulf. And it all has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz to get to the rest of the world, or most of it. And some of these countries rely solely on the strait to get their energy out to the world. Now, China and a lot of Asia, East Asia, is dependent on the Strait of Hormuz. Not just China, but South Korea, Japan. They rely a lot on the energy, specifically on the natural gas. And it's definitely like very contested. And what I found is this is kind of like a glass house problem. Much of the infrastructure, the Allied infrastructure, is very open and susceptible to Iranian attack. And that doesn't go both ways. It's the Iranians who have a lot of infrastructure that's well defended and well guarded. They've positioned most of their assets within the mountain ranges. If you look, when we zoom out, you can see most of the Iranian infrastructure is in that mountain range, well defended. And there's reports of American attacks on this infrastructure, and it seems to be that some of this stuff has withstood the attacks and operating as is. If not, they've had more production, right? And I don't know about that specifically, but I know that when it comes to the missiles, they're still producing missiles. It's not that they're running out of missiles. Unlike us in our situation, we are running out of missiles. So that's the situation we're in. And where it could get really ugly is if the world's infrastructure for oil, if 20% of it is decommissioned, then we're really in for a big shock, because we're seeing what the world's doing when it doesn't have access to oil. But this is just a blockade. This is just kind of like a light switch, right? We can either turn the oil on or off. If we damage the actual infrastructure, like we've seen in Qatar, that could be like a 5 year period. Even if we have a peace signing, we could still see our oil and natural gas shut off for however long it takes for this infrastructure to be rebuilt. So, and Iran knows this. I think that this is Iran. This is part of the cards that Iran has. This is their hand. We are at their whim because we're so completely exposed to them destroying our energy, or significant portions of the world's energy, that they have a lot of leverage. And conversely, we don't have much leverage. There's not much we can really do to Iran. They're well defended. I mean, we have hit certain sites, and those are important, but they are very well defended. And there's really nothing we can do about that, short of an actual ground invasion, which also, by all accounts, would be extremely difficult because of the nature of their topography. I mean, as you can see, it really is just a huge mountain range, and a lot of their most important sites are embedded in these mountains. So what I would like to point out too, as we zoom out even further, we can see very clear battle lines are being drawn from northern Iraq, even up into Turkey, all the way down to that strait. Very clear battle lines are being drawn. And I mean, I shouldn't say being drawn because they've always been there. But then we'll also zoom in and see what our naval presence looks like. Well, you can see here in the naval presence, we have a specific blockade, right? I know it's 3 ships. For some reason, I only have 2 listed here, but I'm almost certain that there's 3 ships that are producing this blockade. And then closely behind them is the USS Abraham Lincoln, right? And you can see that we have a pretty heavy naval presence at that immediate opening of the strait into the Gulf of Oman. And then you also have the Muscat Sea Air Base, right? So we have a very strong naval presence, and it is what it is. So that's where we're at. You can also see, sitting out in the open, we have the USS George H.W. Bush. Alongside them, we have the submarine patrol zone. So when we start getting into the events of what's really going on, I think that there's, like I said, there's a lot more than meets the eye. So June 1st, there was allegedly a strike. The United States allegedly struck a ship on its way to Kharg Island. We're not necessarily, I don't know, I haven't seen too much about that, but that's what the Iranians said they were responding to. So, following that strike, I'm actually going to zoom in, get a screenshot for that for us, right? Following that strike, Iran then decided to hit Beirut, and then they also following that strike, they decided to hit a small port. Apparently, there was some radio infrastructure. It was U.S. infrastructure. I don't think anybody was hurt, but they launched a strike at an obscure portion of Kuwait. The American response to that was to hit a radio station that they have. And that was a significant radio station. It was on the Keshem Island. I'll read that brief description. It's a drone and surveillance control hub positioned at the chokepoint of the Strait of Hormuz. It controls Iranian reconnaissance at the strait, monitoring U.S. naval movements through the strait, and directs attacks for drone swarms against shipping. It sits at the narrowest point, giving Iranian radar and sensor coverage of the entire vessel, or of every vessel transiting. The communication tower was struck on June 2nd, and it was the nerve center for Iran's Hormuz surveillance architecture. So, realistically, what I believe this is, and what's significant, is we know that there's submarines that are patrolling the area to begin with. I think that this was a huge opening for the Americans to push subs through the strait, and I'm imagining that there's probably already a submarine presence within the strait as we speak. So that's a very significant conclusion that we can draw from that. Moving forward, there are also subsequent attacks. The Iranians attacked a ship that they believed to be American passing through the Strait of Hormuz. And then there were subsequent strikes in Kuwait. And both of these strikes are significant. So the first strike was a strike on an American airbase. The second strike was a strike on a Kuwaiti commercial airport, but it was more than just that. I know that the news is putting it out that it was a commercial airport. The reality is it's a dual-use airport. So, there's some conclusions to be drawn from this. You can see on the screen, there's the 2 airports. There's what they do. I'll actually read into it. So, the Ali Al Salem Air Base is Kuwait's primary U.S. air power hub. They're 20 kilometers from the Iraqi border. Their closest air base to Iran's southwestern launch corridor. It hosts fighter squadrons, airlift aircraft, and ISR platforms. Then when we look at Kuwait's international airport, it's their only commercial airport and primary international air logistics. It's also a dual-use civilian and military staging node for coalition logistics. I'm not going to get completely into that, but here's really what you really need to derive from this. So I don't think, and this is my personal opinion, and I really hope I'm wrong, but from the nature of the attacks, I don't think that I really don't think that this is going to stop anytime soon. I think this is actually what we're seeing is, I don't know how many people have been in fights or been in, verbal altercations or what, but generally these things don't happen out of nowhere. There's a slow buildup and then there's very fast reactions. And this is kind of the situation that we're in right now is there's a very slow buildup. The United States, I believe, and Iran both know that this could escalate. And I really hope that the peace talks are going to come to fruition. But from what I see at this time, look, we knocked out probably part of their sonar infrastructure, and there is a naval base right behind that ground control station, but their ability to track the ocean under the sea is limited now, and we know that I'm sure they have the capabilities. I mean, binoculars are good enough to monitor the actual strait. But you can't see under the ocean. And if we knocked out their capability to do that, then we would absolutely take advantage of that and push subs through. Anybody who wouldn't in this situation would just be not prudent to do. You know what I mean? So we took advantage of that. Absolutely. And then next, when you look at a map, you see that the border of Kuwait to Iraq to Iran really isn't that long. And I probably could take a ruler and figure out how far away that really is, but it can't be more than a few hundred miles, if that, from Kuwait to Iran. So we're looking at you might as well disregard Iraq completely, and you can notice that if we were ever to push into Iran, Kuwait is 100% the place we would do it. And Kuwait absolutely is a staging point, and we say it in our own words. This is our primary node. I mean, we have basically two major airports that we can push troops, supplies, and logistics through in order to build up our forces on, what would you call that? Iran's southwestern border in a way, it's difficult because you can see Iran's kind of slanted, but right on their border, we have a place where we can absolutely build up a massive amount of troops and push through. Now, what's little known is there's also a base to Iran's northern border. It's an Iraqi base called the Harir Air Base. And what you can also learn is there's a northwestern Syria base that we're strategically drawing down. And most of those forces are moving to the air base in Iraq. That's on Iran's northwestern border. So we have a very, very intricate system going on, and I'd be terrified if they hit that Iraqi base, because I don't know. I would think that Iraqi base, just there on a gut level, I would think that would kind of signal that Iran is more so worried of a ground invasion than anything else, because it's reported. It's not like I'm saying anything that isn't known, that there is troop movement building up that northwestern base, that they're divesting a base in Syria in order to do so. We know that this massive staging point, they're hitting the airport, the so-called commercial airport, that's also dual use. So they're trying to absolutely restrict air movement. And now you need to question, why would they want to restrict air movement, right? Specifically, they're making these strikes on the airports. Wouldn't you want to be able to keep that open line to get people out? obviously Iran's weighing the options and saying, no, we think that they're pushing people in through, you know what I mean? They're pushing people in. They're not letting them leave. So we're not, they don't believe that we're drawing down our forces is what that signals. If anything, that signals they believe that we're pushing forces into the into that northern area. Uh, it's difficult with with the borders, but we're pushing people into Kuwait at their southern border. So that seems to be what Iran is hedging. And now we also know why did we hit their radar station? And we know we have submarines in the area, so why did we hit their radar station? So, I mean, when you look at these strikes, there's conclusions that you can draw from this, and I, it's one of those things. They probably want it's pray for peace, prepare for war. Let's hope that these peace talks are legitimate. But what's scary is we did sneak attack them multiple times. We've also had peace negotiations that were literally bombed. So Iran really can't trust anything. And obviously, the global narrative has been split between what they're saying and what we're saying. In the global narrative, they are like the West can't allow for warmongering. You know what I mean? Because we've lobbied against it so long. We've always had a thing against war. Everybody in the world and through history has had a thing against warmongers. And if we're seen to be warmongering Iran, then that's a huge problem for us politically. So we need to kind of say, hey, we're in peace negotiations while we slowly, it's just a very slow sinking in of a knife, it seems, that we're building up our strategic will. And yeah, I think that as we stand right now, there's probably submarines in the Persian Gulf. And we're probably attempting to ramp up troop movement via air into that southwestern staging point of Iran. So that's what I would gather. But what we're going to get into next kind of is how this blockade is positioned very briefly. Actually, I think we already went over that. But there is one thing that everybody should be aware of when we're talking about this, and this will be the last little bit about our position. You know what I mean? Our position in the Middle East, and that is our ace in the hole. So I found this interesting when I was going through the research of this. What you can see here is Diego Garcia, and now this is one of the most important. It's so far away, but it's one of the most important positions that we have in the middle, or in regard to the Middle East. And this is where we have a strategic, basically bombing encampment. We have, and I'll go down through the list, but it's the works. We've got the B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, the B-1B Lancers, the B-52 Stratofortresses, all stationed there. It's the port capable of accommodating 30 warships. I even have a note here. It is irreplaceable as a long-range bomber staging platform, and it's out of Iran's conventional strikes. So it's out of range of Iran's conventional strikes, but we are completely in range to fly over nuclear capable bombers. And that's really our ace in the hole. So, it's a very odd situation, and there's so much infrastructure that's involved with this situation that the picture that's being painted in the news that, I don't know how to put it because depending on who you are, you see it differently. But really, this is a stalemate because we have all of this infrastructure. We have solid infrastructure, but it's so susceptible to Iranian attack that we have so much. I mean, we have such a commitment to this area, we can't even help it. However, on the Iranian side, they don't have as much infrastructure or resources, yet what they do have is solidly defended. It's almost impenetrable, and that was the major military accounts, was that this was an impenetrable fortress. So, where we go from here, I don't know, but from what I see, I really hope that these negotiations go well. I don't think they will. And I think for, very apparent reasons. And the media has their point of view. We're hearing that Israel is kind of throwing a wrench in the mix, and I believe that to be partially true. But I'm going to get into one of the things that I think is absolutely true. I think that this has a lot more to do with Russia than anything else, or has a lot more to do with Russia than one would be led to believe on the face of this. And that's what we're going to get into next. So, this is probably going to be the most controversial part of the show. And, right off the bat, I am going to address, the big elephant in the room. Um, Obviously, there's been what I would liken to the Red Scare, this idea that Israel is pulling the strings. And, I've said it before, I'll say it again. I'm sure there's some validity to it. But what I would make the argument, I'd rather make the argument that Israel does have some certain interests for its country. And it saw that the United States was kind of pushed into a situation that it could piggyback off of. And this is more of a strategy of kill two birds with one stone, or, if I was literally thinking of the phrase the other day, or like this morning. It's a win-win. It's a win-win scenario. Israel sees that the United States was kind of pressured into this situation, and I believe that they took advantage of that. So, but that's not to say that they are the end all be all or the entire cause of what we see today. I actually don't believe that. I believe that this is a multi administration plan. I believe that this is like a very coordinated, high level plan that, I mean, it kind of just blew my mind when I was doing the research. There's a reason why, and again, I'm going to reiterate, please share this. Please share this. A lot of work went into this. I have a business that I run, and I took time away from doing that because I thought that this was so important to get more facts for everybody. This is probably the most important thing that I could share to the world, honestly. I mean, if this can gain traction, I think this is going to give a lot of clarity. This is something that's been in the back of my mind for a while, and now I'm putting it out there for the world to see. So, here we go. So as you can see, I'm pulling up this map. I believe that really what this response is with Iran, everybody knows that the nuclear thing is kind of a huge crock of what. But we can actually start to see the bigger picture here. Now, I know I've showed a few pictures. You can see the Belt and Road Initiative. It's that dotted line going from east to west, but you also see another dotted line going from, north to south into Mumbai. Well, what that is the International North-South Transport Corridor. And this is just a long-standing project basically from Moscow down to Mumbai, India. And here's where it starts to get really interesting. So if we go all the way back, pre-Ukraine war, 51% of Russia's oil exports was to Europe, 13% to Germany, 9% to the Netherlands, 6% to Poland, and then 23% to other parts of the EU. 20% went to China, only 1% went to India, 8% to Turkey, which is important. That is an important note. But after Ukraine, Russia took a hard pivot. Half of their exports went to China, and then 36% went to India. And that was a response because India wanted to get the cheap fuel. And here's the big thing. We've been rubbing shoulders with India and getting nice with them. There's talks, if it hasn't gone through yet, there's talks about putting a major Apple plant in China and moving away from into India, moving away from the Chinese market, or expanding out of is a better way of putting it. So, and there's a lot of American companies that do business with China, and we have a huge worker trade with the H-1B visa. Like, there's a huge infrastructure built around China, or around around China also, but around India. Our partnership with India goes to mid to high level workers, expertise workers. Along with that, we're looking to put major American production into India. Um, and just like Turkey, how we have a huge problem with Turkey, even though we're good with Erdogan, we want to install an even more pro-Western government there. Absolutely. And you can see that Turkey is kind of pushing back on that, but that's like our main thing. And and you're going to see what I mean here in a second. So let's do this. Why don't we go all the way back to the Ukraine topic? So I'm scrolled out all the way here. You can kind of see and this by no means is accurate. I probably will. If this gets enough views and likes, I will go back and I will make a very accurate map like I did down in Iran in the Middle East. I'll do that for Russia now because I'm sure there will be a lot more information there. But what you see here is every single, dark yellow circle and line is basically Russia's oil infrastructure. And those lines going over Estonia, down under Sweden into Germany is the Nord Stream pipelines. And I'm just going to do a super brief summary because this has been something that I've focused on. I'm not as good. I'm going to take a quick moment to cite some people who are very good. Scott Wharton, Dave Smith, Rob Bernstein, Daryl Cooper, all four of those guys. And they'll have even better people to recommend probably, but I believe Scott Wharton's probably the absolute best from the accounts of people that I really admire and respect. He's very good. But when you look at that timeline, you can see that the timeline can go back to Bush. The timeline can go back very far, but we're just going to talk about Ukraine right now, or, Europe here for a second. It was under Obama that we started to do some antagonizing acts in Ukraine and kind of pushing things in a way that might be a little bit not taken lightly. I believe eventually there were some early, and I'm going to be getting the timeline wrong because it's been a little bit since I've gone over this, but there were some significant actions under Obama that started to push into, the Ukraine and making it a little bit more contentious. Then under Trump, that ironic quid pro quo that never really even came to fruition, where I believe he was trying to get information on Biden, and he was like, I'll give you the weapons. And he ended up giving the Ukrainians. Oh, yeah, that's right. There was the revolution. All right, it's starting to come back to me now. The revolution happened under Obama. And Obama and here's a really important note, Obama immediately signaled that the the guy had left, but he was still alive. He was like one day on the run. We immediately recognized the new government. Anybody who thinks that Ukraine wasn't some sort of, U.S. backed color revolution is just not doing their research. And I don't mean to say that to be offensive. I really truly mean if you look at the events and you understand what was going on, more than just what you see on the news, like this was absolutely, and we know it. Just humor me and look up the Italian presidential elections following World War II, and you'll completely understand that Europe, we've absolutely had a hand in elections, and Ukraine is no different. I don't know how much control we have because here's the thing, I don't believe the United States is omnipotent. Vietnam's a great example of that. And that's like another one that's not contested. We installed the Vietnamese president or leader down in South Vietnam. The guy basically went rogue by our standards. So we had a coup during a war of the guy that we backed, and we installed a new guy into power. That's factual. So I'm really not going to get into things that obscure things that people are going to find offensive or just, may write off immediately. I'm going to try and keep this factual to things that we can just look at. But when we see Obama, okay, revolution happened under Obama, the Victoria Nuland, hot mic, it was really a leaked phone call, came out, and that's like another piece of information. She's basically saying this is going to be the government that we want in Ukraine, yada this, yada that. Um, and I'm going to be fair. I will take a brief pause here. I don't know what the Russian instigation was. You know what I mean? If any, but like I'm going to be honest. A lot of times people kind of get caught up and it is good to keep your own house clean, but maybe there were some antagonistic moves by Russia. Actually, matter of fact, I know of one, BRICS, that whole, and I would wonder. Let me look that up really quick. When did the idea of BRICS come about? BRICS currency. Doing this real time. All right. In 2008. Or excuse me, 2018. Okay, so that happened a little bit after the color revolution. So I don't know, but we'll see. You know what I mean? We'll see, like I'll definitely do the research because that is a good point to see why the United States may have responded the way they did. Anyways, but the point being, revolution happened under Obama. We know about it through Victoria Nuland's leaked phone call. Following that, Trump had the quid pro quo because he was trying to get some information on the Bidens, and it kind of backfired. He ended up giving them the weapons anyways. And then fast forward under Biden, the conflict begins. And I actually remember, if everybody remembers, it was like 3 days before when Kamala Harris was supposed to go to Russia, have peace talks, like pre-peace talks. The war hadn't started yet. She goes, and I think it was 3 days before, she like literally on camera goes, and I'll never forget this. I hope I have this right because that'd be really bad if I don't. But she goes, Ukraine will join NATO. She said that I'm almost positive was 3 days before Russia invaded. And she was going there in a response to Russian buildup at the border. People should also note the Ukraine border and the Russian border has always, well, not always, but in recent times has been hot. Even before the war, and like apparently from what I understand, Russians were sending new troops to the Ukraine border to get fighting experience, to get them weathered. It wasn't an all-out war, but it's been a conflict for a while now. And I could probably go back and figure out the actual dates of that, but I know that it's been a conflict for a while. Nevertheless, it heats up February 23rd, 2022, and I know that because that's actually the day that was my first day out of the Marine Corps. So I got my last day in the Marine Corps was February 22nd, 2022. My first day out was the 23rd of 2022. And I woke up seeing, I remember it vividly. I woke up and I'm like, or maybe it was the 24th. I might actually be getting those dates wrong. It was the 23rd was the day I got out. Yeah, the 22nd was like my last full day. The 23rd was the day I got out. The 24th was when they invaded. I woke up in a hotel room, check my phone, and I see Russia invades. And I actually thought about trying to re-enlist because, and that's a whole separate story, but I thought about re-enlisting because I was like, oh, I can't let my boys go without me. It was interesting. That was a really interesting thought. I was like, man, I've been out one day, anyways. But yeah, so then under Biden, he literally says Nord Stream, this can't go on yet or this, whatever. He said something along the lines of Nord Stream will be no more. And then, I believe a few months to half a year later, the Nord Stream pipeline blows up, effectively cutting Russia off completely from Europe. Russia's ports have been, or not Russia's ports, but I mean, their only warm water port there in the Black Sea is basically just not applicable to their global strategy right now. They're just having a really hard time pushing out oil down through into the Mediterranean. And like in recent events, and this is one of the things that sparked my interest, but it is interesting to see that as the war in Iran started to pick up, which was in February, so too did the Ukrainian pressure on Russia. Um, and Russia, so we'll get back to the logistics of the oil because that's actually what's important. So from Moscow, there's this, what they call the International North-South Transport Corridor. During the Ukrainian war, so immediately following all these sanctions, the lack of sending energy to Germany, Russia pivoted and started sending, exporting their oil and natural gas down to India. And India was buying up a lot of their oil and natural gas. And so you can see down here specifically, the trade route passes directly down through the Strait of Hormuz. I'm just going to let that sink in. The trade route passes down directly through the Strait of Hormuz, almost into, like, just directly into American naval power, the American blockade. And so you're starting to see the picture here that really what we're attempting to do is cut off Russia's ability to export fuel. And what do you think happened? So, like, to further my point, what do you think when Trump went to China to talk with Xi Jinping? What do you think they talked about? Because the only other person who's taking oil right now is Turkey. And Turkey is in a legitimate conflict with an opposition party who's even more pro-West than Erdogan, who has very close personal relations with Trump. And there's people even more pro-West than him. So if Turkey is taking 10% of Russia's oil right now and they're having violent protests for an uprising, Turkey's relatively pro-West. They're just taking Russian energy. If their government's threatened, he's literally trying to write himself in for a third term because the pressure is so bad. He's like literally trying to change the constitution. India can no longer get Russian energy because of this conflict at the Strait. So the only other person is China. And what do you think happened when Trump went to China? China, who also, via the Strait's closure, China, who no longer is getting energy, like 90% of its or 80% of its energy that comes from Iran. What do you think the conversation was? How do we get this? How do we get our energy back? And what do you think the deal was? Or what do you think the deal is on the table? We don't know if anything's been taken into effect. But what do you think that deal was? To maybe not buy Russian energy? Because they're really the last, them and Iran are the last, I mean, and it's not even Iran. Iran doesn't even import any of their Russian oil. So it's really Russia. If we can move China now through, basically an energy ultimatum, what's going to happen? And China is left sitting between, do we utilize Russian oil or do we utilize or Russian energy or American energy? And, that's the big question. I don't know what would sway China one way or the other, but they absolutely took that. They took that meeting with Trump for a reason. So the conclusions that you can draw from this are very, very broad, but I think that this is absolutely an energy play. I think that we're trying to cut Russia off completely from exporting their energy and also solidifying the US dollar. And this is a very important concept for people to understand. So I don't know if I kept it in the last video or not, but I will reiterate because this is important. The British government, when it was the British Empire, had a strategy of having something like 10 times the world's ships combined. We have done the same. The point was because if you can control trade, you can control countries. Very similar to the concept of the Federal Reserve. If you can control the amount of currency in circulation, you can control the economy. If you can control trade, you can control countries. And we've always tried to have or not always tried, but we've had this naval capacity, and then we shifted to the petrodollar, which, like I believe I did mention this. That's how you get your seat at the table. Now, the and I think that we're going to have long-term social reverberations from what's happening right now. Like I said, I believe that they're like the Red Scare. I think the Red Scare has a lot to do with this, because ultimately people were paranoid about communism. And again, communism, there was some strong basis. Like there was some basis to the argument to be worried about the communists. However, I don't believe that they were all entirely factual or reasonable. But that paranoia has stayed within our government, and maybe rightfully so. Maybe there's parts of the Russian culture and ecosystem and government that we don't know about, and there's a reason why. Um, there's a reason why we're doing what we're doing, and there's a good reason to believe that there's still some communist ideologies that they're going to push or whatnot. Again, I don't know. We're not being. This is obviously not a transparent game. But I do believe that very similar things are happening with Israel, and it's sad to see. I really hope that the paranoia doesn't take on forever. Again, there's legitimate criticisms to be made. Don't get me wrong. I am well aware of the cultural problems that we have with that situation. But again, from what you can see, and if you know the events that have led up to Iran, you can see that this has a much stronger play towards oil than it does anything else, in my opinion. And I believe that Israel saw that the United States was being pushed into this situation, and they're piggybacking off of the situation in order to get the gains they can, because they're kind of being the tick on the dog, so to speak. They're riding the United States' intervention into Iran. And now, trust me, I'm aware that the precedent for us going in was Israel. What I would say to that is based off of what I'm saying, do we not think the case could be made that we said, hey, look, we need you guys to do something for us? Like, hey, look, this is going to benefit you. Can you do something for us? And I also get it. Yes, all these wars have been fought for them. It benefits them. Okay, yes, I also get that. But guess what? It's also, if I scroll back in, it's also benefited us greatly. We basically have colonized the Middle East and have taken that oil infrastructure for ourselves. All right. So, and then having that oil, I believe it's the same strategy as having 10 times the warships of the entire world. And if we can control the oil 10 times the world supply of oil, then and we link it to our dollar, we essentially control the world. That's how we maintain our supremacy as the United States empire. And that's the case that I'm arguing. Again, I understand the other side, but I think that that's a very microscopic view of things. And I think that's a great analogy is, yes, what you're seeing, potentially Israel, some of this stuff is a little bit far out, but I do believe that this overall is a play for oil. And there's some other stuff that we'll do a little bit of bonus content real quick. So I would love to hear everybody's thoughts on that too, as well. So please, if anybody knows anything, let me know. But I'm going to do a really, really quick rundown. So you can see here there's this border, and it just says Shia and Sunni on either side, and then you've got Christian up towards the top by Georgia and Russia. Now, this is very important. Excuse me, this is very important. So, for the Christian audience, and I'm going to try and keep this at 5 minutes, but this is going to be I think, the simplest and best breakdown for everybody to understand what's going on. So, for the Christian audience, let's take the three major denominations we have, and maybe we'll just do two, but no, we'll do three just to cover all of our bases, just so everybody has an idea of the situation. So Shia, you have Shia Islam, which is basic, and I'm, again, I don't know if I kept it in the last video, but if I'm not trying to butcher this or be disrespectful, I'm trying to summarize what the religions are so that people have an idea. But basically, Shia, they believe in Muhammad's bloodline, specifically, I believe his cousin and uncle, and they're called imams. They're religious figures, and they're supposed to be, have some divine wisdom, from what I gather. And then you have the Sunni, which are more so democratic in their deliberation of priests and the religion, and they essentially are looking at things. You know what I mean? That's really all it is. Like, they're a little bit more diplomatic and democratic about things, from what I gather. And then you do have small sects. Forgive me, the Houthis. I'm not very keen on what their specific sect is, but Bahrain is important. Bahrain's also one of the only Shia majority countries that is, and it's at 60 or 65%. That is on the Gulf states, but there's one more. I believe it's Ibadism. I've forgotten. I have it in here somewhere. If anybody wants to go through the map and try and find it, you can. If I'm able to figure out how to post this, but Ibadism essentially is, they do revere the imams, but they don't believe the imams have the same amount of power, if I'm getting that correct. So that's the three. And then you have the Houthis in the south. But for the immediate area, regarding Iran, Iraq, the Gulf states, I guess maybe they're all the Gulf states. I really don't know how people define them. But, this general area minus Yemen, which that is important because Yemen is currently, and I will say, I'm glad I brought this up. There is still some conflict in the Red Sea. So essentially right now, both of these waterways are just, there's nothing getting out. So that's really important to note. So there's basically a holdup on a lot of oil in this area. And that's also the strategic importance, because what it's done is it's pushed out the United States energy. We have to be making deals. I hate to say it, but that's probably what's going on. The U.S. has cornered the oil market. We've cornered the oil market. Now, unfortunately, a good portion of our oil market is tied up in the Straits. However, we're still the number one producer of oil and liquid natural gas. I've heard that we are still somehow a net importer. I don't know. I could probably do some more fact checking on that. And there probably is good reason for that. And listen, like I said, I have a business that I'm running, so I can't study this 100% of the time. But maybe I'll get back to everybody on what that case is. But from what I gather, yeah, a good portion of the oil that we help to deliver to the world is tied up, but we're still free. And I'd imagine with how things are going in Venezuela, how calm that situation went, the lack of support to Cuba. We absolutely made a backdoor deal in Venezuela also. And I don't believe that we did that with Iran. There is no possible way. But again, I think that the strategic goal of this was to block Russian oil from going to India. And then we can leverage China because they don't get all their oil from Russia either. And I don't believe Russia has enough infrastructure to get all that oil to China. Because if you look at China, I'm so going off topic because I really did want to talk about some of this. But if you look at China, all right, Russian oil can get in through the north, but it's very mountainous terrain, right? Oil can move up through the coastline. I mean, this has been a known thing. It's one of the reasons why America, actually, little known fact also, it's one of the reasons why America became such a prosperous country is we have so many rivers and deltas in our geography that we've been able to transport things far quicker and far earlier in our country's history. Um, than anybody else. So we've been able to really expand America very quickly. Truly, God's country. I mean, it really was a massive gift to the people that came here. Because when you look at other countries and the not demographics, the geographic situations that they're in, it's just very, very tough. Everybody's competing with everybody. There's mountains, hills. There's not a lot of rivers. But you go to America, it's isolated from the world from the north because the north is really it's just like a tundra. From the south, there's a natural choke point with Mexico. From the east and west, we have the world's two largest oceans, and then again within it, you have all these rivers. Truly, God's country. So, anyways, uh, where was I? Speaking of God, right? So, Shia. All right, I really got off topic, so I'm just going to go through it really quick because I did want to describe this in Christian cultural terms and then Jewish cultural terms for whatever Jewish audience may be listening to this. But Shia believes in the direct bloodline of Muhammad and in the Imams. Sunni believes more so in a democratic priesthood. The Ibads, they have reverence for the Imams, but they don't believe that they are necessarily speak for the religion. In Christian terms, you could liken this to Christianity, or obviously, right? You could liken this to essentially the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, they believe their priests are of the lineage of apostolic succession. First through Peter, then through the rest of the apostles, and so on and so forth. Whereas Protestants believe in a very democratic and liberal priesthood. Where depending on what denomination, it can be women. Um, and I don't want to get into the specifics because let's just stick with the priesthood because that is makes the most sense. And then you have maybe I believe it's the Anglican Church has some claim, or actually a better one. That's right, a better one would be the Orthodoxy. Now I don't know what Ibadism, how if it's very conservative or if it's liberal, because that could go either way. Because the Anglican Church believes somewhat in the apostolic succession, and they have some claim. Man, it's it's whatever church came out of Britain, and I might be getting it wrong saying Anglican, but I also know that they may believe the Eucharist is still the body of Christ. But whatever, or if they're like the Russian or the Eastern Orthodoxy, where again they have reverence for the Pope, they have reverence for apostolic succession, but they don't, or they believe in apostolic succession. They revere the Pope, but they don't believe that the Pope speaks for everybody or speaks for the religion as a whole. So those are your three Christian narratives. And then I went and looked at the Jewish narratives, but like your Hasidic Jews, which still believe very heavily in the laws of Moses. And then I believe, I looked it up. So I'm just going to go back in it again. So the Orthodox Judaism, they strictly adhere to traditional Jewish law. Then you have the Masorti, where they're like hyper involved, but I don't know, they believe in adapting the Torah, but they're still very, or I guess, excuse me, the Haredi. I'm butchering this, but I remember going through it. I was like, it's very interesting because each religion, it seems, has these three big branches. And then you have Reform Judaism, which may be like your type of Zionist, where it's, they don't necessarily practice the Jewish law to a T, but they still have faith. And then, your Orthodox Judaism, where they do take into account the Mosaic law, and they keep those traditions. And then somewhere in between, and I believe that is the Masorti, where it says the middle ground. It arose in the 19th century, where it still values the traditional Jewish laws, and they believe in the laws, but they've adapted to the modern world. So, just so you have an idea of what we have going on, it's the same thing down there. But again, the two main sects are the ultra conservative, believing in the bloodline, similar to the Catholic Church, believing in the apostolic succession. And then you have the Sunni, which, and for those who don't know, apostolic succession, when Christ breathed on Peter, giving him the ability to keep and loose sin on the world in this lifetime, it's believed that Peter then passed that down to the apostles through breathing on them. And then subsequently, priests following that lineage, the second generation or the first generation apostles, pass it down to the second, and so on and so forth. That's one of the reasons why in some Catholic Bibles you'll see the lineage of the Pope. You'll see Peter, and I don't know. There's no way I could remember all of them, but you'll see it all the way down to Pope Leo today. So that shows apostolic succession. It means that we can trace back that gift of forgiving sin all the way back to Peter and then to Christ. So similar to the Shia, they can trace the Imams all the way back to Muhammad's cousin and uncle, I believe. And then the Sunni, like the Protestants, are a little bit more liberal in their who they choose to run their various organizations. So I don't know how priesthood. Well, hold on. I do know how priesthood works with the Jewish tradition, but I would wonder. I mean, I know it's the Levites, but I don't know. I would wonder if the Orthodox Jews still consider the Levites to be their main priesthood, and then other Jews practice, and maybe they do study the Torah. That'd be a really good question to ask them. Is your Orthodoxy, like, is your conservative, do they trace back their lineage back to the Levites? Who knows? But anyways, I don't know. That all of that said, that's the cultural issue that we have in the area, and that's something to keep into account. It's one of the reasons why Iraq and Iran have been ostracized. That's also very interesting to know. Iraq and Iran had a war, which is very interesting, because that'd be like France and Italy. Well, actually, I guess technically France and Italy did go to war, but two Catholic nations going to war against each other. When like, if you look at the Crusades, it'd literally be like during some downtime during the Crusades, France and Italy fought each other. Or I guess I don't know if they were really France and Italy back then, but I'm getting off topic. Anyways, there is one last important point that we need to go over, and that is Exxon and Chevron expansion off of the coast of Israel. So basically, Qatar Energy, in partnership with ExxonMobil, which is very important, is actively expanding natural gas exploration in the Eastern Mediterranean. Here's the big deal about this. This is a huge deal. So notoriously, Qatar has been the mediator for this entire conflict. They're the neutral. They're the Sweden. They're the mediator. They have close ties with a lot of the proxies of Iran, and they also obviously have close ties with American forces. Now, this this corridor from Cyprus to Israel is very important. ExxonMobil is also very important because it's almost an and I don't mean exclusively in shareholder sense, but I mean exclusively in a cultural sense. is American. It's diehard American, formed in New Jersey, based out of Texas. This is 100% an American company. Again, not in shareholder senses, but in like a true cultural and loyalty sense, it's an American company. They were, so here's another interesting topic to note. Shell was pushed out of Russia during the conflict. Shell voluntarily left Russia. It was amicable. Russia expelled Exxon and kept a ton of Exxon's money. So Exxon lost a ton of money. They were working in Russia with Russia, and I'll get more into that another time. But yeah, just so you know. So, anyways, within that corridor, Exxon is working with working with Cyprus. Cyprus is allowing them to work off of their coast for oil, and Qatar Energy is working with them. Now, the reason why this is significant is this, and I have a note here. If Qatar's neutrality collapses entirely, this could be it. This could be a linchpin moment, due to a lot of other reasons that I'm not even going to get into because this video has got to end. But if its neutrality collapses entirely, it removes the only functioning communication between Israel and Hamas, as if that's even around. And a breakdown like that could have a cascading effect or cascading consequences for any prospect of stability in the Middle East. So, yeah, that's a big deal. If that's taken the wrong way and Qatar's neutrality is brought into question, we could see a really big cascading effect. So with all that said, that's the show. Thank you for listening if you made it this far. I hope that I gave you something really deep to think about. I'm going to try and figure out how to get this map somewhere so that everybody can look at it and look at the intricacies, and I'll eventually add to it and add Russia and Ukraine, especially if this video gets traction. Please get this video traction because I have a business to run, and I'm not going to sacrifice my time with my business doing this, or at least I'm not going to sacrifice too much of it because I do have other responsibilities to my clients. But again, I do. Oh, it's Bahrain that has the EBADs. Oh wait, no, Bahrain is technically Shia majority. Dang, I was reading the wrong note. But yeah, so I do have a business that I'm running, but I do find this stuff very important. I believe in educating the population, educating my friends and family and the people that I know, and I think now is the time where I can educate, not just them, educate the world, because these are things that you need to be able to navigate and have a thorough understanding of, so that you can move through your life correctly, so that you know what you're doing, you know what you're speaking about. So yeah, and if anybody has any questions or concerns, or even if you resonated with who I am and you like the way that I do research and how seriously I take my job and the things that support my job, obviously information about the world being one of them, if you appreciate that and you want to learn a little bit more about how I work with my clients and how I utilize different strategies in proportion to their various cases, risk objectives, and situations, please feel free to give me a call at 267-835-2403. You can email me at nathan@atlanticfinancialmngt.net. And yeah, or you can even DM me or something along those lines. So with all that said, I hope everybody has a great rest of their night. Happy Friday, and I'll see everybody soon. Thank you.